I never thought I'd be the guy telling this kind of story. I mean, when you get married, you think you know the person standing next to you. At least, I thought I knew Melissa. We'd been together for 6 years, married for 2, and everything seemed solid. Or maybe I just convinced myself it was. Melissa and I met at a friend's barbecue. She was the kind of woman who could light up a room just by walking into it. Confident, charming, and, honestly, a little intimidating. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world when she talked to you. It's funny looking back now, that quality I loved so much about her is probably what blinded me to everything else. The first year of marriage was good, really good. We traveled, spent weekends binge-watching shows, and talked about starting a family. By the time our second anniversary rolled around, Melissa was pregnant, and I couldn't have been happier. Becoming a dad was something I'd dreamed about for years. I was ready for the sleepless nights, the diaper changes, all of it. What I wasn't ready for was everything else that came with it. Looking back, the first signs were small, almost unnoticeable. Melissa started acting distant, like her mind was somewhere else. She'd spend hours scrolling on her phone, laughing at messages she'd never share with me. When I'd ask her what was so funny, she'd brush it off. Just some silly meme, she'd say, flashing that smile that used to make me feel like the luckiest guy in the world. Only now, it felt different. Forced. I chalked it up to the pregnancy. People always say hormones can make women act differently, right? I told myself she was just stressed or tired. But then there were other things. She started coming home late from her prenatal yoga classes. Once, I noticed a faint smell of cologne on her jacket. When I asked about it, she laughed. "Oh, one of the dads at yoga gave me a hug goodbye." "Don't be jealous," she teased. I laughed it off, too, but something about it didn't sit right with me. Then there were the lies, small ones at first. She'd say she was meeting a friend for lunch, but later I'd find out she was somewhere else entirely. Like the time she told me she was going to Target, but her credit card statement showed a charge from a fancy Italian restaurant across town. When I confronted her, she shrugged it off. "Oh," I stopped for a quick bite. I didn't think it was a big deal. Maybe it wasn't, but the Melissa I knew would have told me about it. The Melissa I knew didn't keep secrets. Things hit a boiling point one Saturday morning. I was cleaning the kitchen while Melissa was in the shower. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and without thinking, I glanced at the screen. It was a message from someone named Derek. "Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you." My heart dropped. I stared at the message, hoping I'd somehow misread it. But there it was, plain as day. My hands were shaking as I unlocked her phone. Yeah, I know, invasion of privacy and all that. But at that moment, I didn't care. I needed answers. What I found shattered me. There were dozens of messages between Melissa and this Derek guy. Flirty, suggestive, explicit. They'd been meeting up for weeks, maybe longer. The worst part? Some of the messages hinted that their affair started before she even got pregnant. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. This woman, the mother of my unborn child, was lying to my face every single day. I didn't confront her right away. I couldn't. Instead, I spent the rest of the day pretending everything was fine while inside, I was falling apart. I watched her laugh, eat, and go about her day like nothing was wrong. How could she do that? How could she look me in the eye, knowing what she was doing behind my back? That night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind was racing, replaying every moment of our relationship, every conversation, every kiss. Was any of it real? Did she ever love me, or was I just some placeholder until someone better came along? The next morning, I made up my mind. I had to confront her. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, pretending everything was okay. But how do you even start a conversation like that? "Hey, honey, so I saw your texts with Derek." "Yeah, right." I decided to wait until after dinner. I figured it'd be better to talk when we weren't rushed or distracted. So, I cooked her favorite meal, chicken parmesan with a side of garlic bread. It felt ridiculous, trying to make everything perfect before dropping a bombshell, but I guess part of me was still hoping there was some kind of explanation. Something that would make all of this make sense. When we sat down to eat, I could barely touch my food. Melissa, on the other hand, was her usual chatty self, going on about some drama with her coworkers. I nodded along, pretending to listen, but my mind was miles away. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I put down my fork, took a deep breath, and said, "Melissa, we need to talk." She froze, her smile fading. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice suddenly cautious. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who's Derek?" The color drained from her face. For a moment, she just stared at me, her eyes wide with shock. Then she laughed, a nervous, shaky laugh. "What are you talking about?" "Don't lie to me, Melissa," I said, my voice trembling. "I saw the messages. I know everything." Her expression shifted in an instant. The shock was replaced by anger. "You went through my phone," she snapped. "How dare you invade my privacy like that? How dare I?" I shot back, my voice rising. "How dare you cheat on me while you're carrying my child? How dare you lie to my face every single day?" She didn't deny it. Instead, she crossed her arms and glared at me. "Maybe if you paid more attention to me, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere," she said coldly. Her words hit me like a slap. Any hope I had of salvaging our relationship vanished in that moment. This wasn't the woman I fell in love with. This was someone else entirely, someone I didn't recognize. And that was just the beginning. Melissa stormed out of the kitchen after that fight, leaving me sitting there, stunned. I'd thought confronting her would give me some kind of closure, but all it did was open a floodgate of emotions I wasn't ready to handle. Anger, sadness, confusion, they all came crashing down at once. I felt like I was drowning. The next few days were a blur. Melissa barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was short, clipped sentences that felt more like daggers than words. I tried to keep things civil, especially with the baby on the way, but every interaction was laced with tension. She'd stay out late, claiming she was visiting friends or running errands, but I knew better. My trust in her was completely shattered. One night, about a week after the confrontation, I decided to follow her. It wasn't something I'm proud of, but I needed to know the truth. If she was still seeing Derek, I had to see it with my own eyes. So, when she said she was going to a late-night yoga class, I waited 10 minutes and then drove to the studio. Sure enough, her car wasn't there. I parked down the street and waited. About an hour later, I saw her car pull into a parking lot outside a small motel. My stomach churned as I watched her get out and walk inside. A few minutes later, another car pulled up, and Derek, the guy from the messages, got out. They embraced in the parking lot before disappearing into one of the rooms. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to storm in and confront them right then and there. But another part of me, the part that still loved her, despite everything, couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I drove home, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. When Melissa came home later that night, I was waiting for her. "How was yoga?" I asked, my voice calm but icy. She hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "Fine," she said, shrugging off her jacket. "Why?" "Because I didn't see your car at the studio," I replied. Her face turned pale, and I knew I had her cornered. "You're spying on me now," she snapped, trying to deflect. "This is insane, Nick." "No, what's insane is you lying to me again," I shot back. "I saw you, Melissa. I saw you with him. At the motel." Her jaw dropped, and for a moment, she looked genuinely panicked. But then, just as quickly, she recovered. "You're overreacting," she said, her tone dismissive. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I demanded. "Explain it to me, because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty damn clear." We were just talking, she said, crossing her arms defensively. About the baby. Derek's been helping me, financially. Financially? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. Melissa, do you hear yourself? You're pregnant with my child, and you're sneaking off to motels with another man. How am I supposed to believe anything you say? She didn't have an answer. Instead, she stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I sat there in the living room, my head in my hands, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. I'd always thought love was enough to get through anything. But now, I wasn't so sure. The days that followed felt like walking through a minefield. Every interaction with Melissa was tense, every word heavy with unspoken accusations. We stopped talking about the baby, about our future, about anything, really. It was like living with a stranger. A stranger I couldn't trust. One night, I sat alone in the nursery we'd been setting up together. The crib was half assembled, the walls still waiting for the cheerful yellow paint we'd picked out. I'd been so excited to be a dad, to bring this little life into the world. But now, all I could think about was whether that life would be brought into a broken home. I couldn't keep living like this. I had to know the full truth, no matter how much it hurt. So, I did something I never thought I'd do, I hired a private investigator. It felt extreme, but I needed proof. Proof of what I already knew in my heart. The investigator worked fast. Within days, he had photos, phone records, and detailed reports that left no room for doubt. Melissa and Derek weren't just having an affair, they were planning a future together. There were messages about moving in, raising the baby as if it were Derek's, and leaving me behind. Seeing it all laid out in black and white was like a knife to the chest. But it also gave me clarity. There was no saving this marriage. Melissa had made her choice, and it wasn't me. When I confronted her with the evidence, she didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she accused me of being controlling, of not giving her the attention she deserved. "You're always working, always distracted," she said. I needed someone who was there for me. Her words stung, but they didn't break me. I'd done everything I could to be a good husband, a good provider. If that wasn't enough for her, then maybe she didn't deserve it. The next morning, I packed a bag and left. I couldn't stay in that house, surrounded by memories of a life that no longer existed. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but I knew it was the right decision. For me, and for the baby. Leaving Melissa was like stepping into a void. For weeks, I felt lost, like I'd left a part of myself behind. But at the same time, I knew staying would have destroyed me. I needed to focus on myself, to figure out who I was without her. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom with outdated appliances and creaky floors, but it was mine. A fresh start. I spent the first few weeks unpacking, decorating, and trying to keep myself busy. Anything to distract me from the emptiness. Therapy helped. I'd never been one to talk about my feelings, but sitting down with someone who could listen without judgment was exactly what I needed. My therapist helped me work through the anger, the betrayal, and the sadness. She made me realize that Melissa's actions weren't a reflection of my worth, but of her own shortcomings. I also started leaning on my friends and family more. At first, I was embarrassed to tell them what had happened. I didn't want to be that guy who got cheated on while his wife was pregnant. But their support was overwhelming. My mom called every day to check on me, my best friend dragged me out of the house for beers and movies, and even my coworkers rallied around me. It reminded me that I wasn't alone, no matter how much it felt like it at times. As the weeks turned into months, I started to feel like myself again. I threw myself into work, took up running, and even started volunteering at a local animal shelter. Helping others gave me a sense of purpose, a way to channel all the emotions I'd been bottling up. And slowly but surely, the pain began to fade. Then came the day Melissa gave birth. I hadn't seen her since I left, but she called to let me know she was in labor. Part of me didn't want to go. I didn't want to face her, to see the life we'd created together and be reminded of everything we'd lost. But I knew I had to be there, not for her, but for my child. Walking into that hospital room was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Melissa was lying in bed, exhausted but glowing in that way only new mothers do. And in her arms was the tiniest, most perfect baby I'd ever seen. My son. I felt a surge of emotions as I held him for the first time. Love, pride, fear. He was so small, so fragile, and yet he felt like the strongest connection I'd ever had to another human being. Whatever happened between Melissa and me, I knew I had to be there for him. Melissa and I barely spoke during my visit. She seemed guarded, and I couldn't blame her. We were no longer partners, just two people trying to navigate a complicated situation for the sake of a child. But for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Not for us, but for him. For his future. Over the next few weeks, we worked out a co-parenting plan. It wasn't easy. There were arguments, misunderstandings, and moments where I wanted to walk away altogether. But every time I looked at my son, I remembered why I was doing this. He deserved parents who could put their differences aside for his sake. Melissa eventually moved in with Derek. I won't lie, it stung. Seeing another man step into the role I'd dreamed of was like pouring salt on an open wound. But I reminded myself that this wasn't about me. It was about my son. I stayed focused on being the best father I could be, no matter how painful the situation was. At first, I doubted my ability to co-parent with Melissa. Trust was shattered, and every interaction felt loaded with resentment. But over time, I realized something: my son didn't need perfect parents. He needed love, stability, and the reassurance that, no matter what, he was the priority. Once I shifted my mindset, things began to change. I started setting boundaries. I stopped engaging in petty arguments and focused solely on decisions that affected my son. Melissa and I found a rhythm, a way to communicate that minimized conflict. It wasn't ideal, but it worked. And for that, I was grateful. There were moments that tested me. Like the first time my son called Derek Dad by mistake. It felt like a punch to the gut. But instead of lashing out, I reminded myself that being a father isn't about a title. It's about showing up, day after day, and proving your love through actions. And that's exactly what I did. As the months went by, I started to heal. Therapy played a huge role in that. My therapist helped me unpack the anger, the betrayal, and the self-doubt that had been eating away at me. She reminded me that Melissa's choices weren't a reflection of my worth. They were a reflection of hers. I also leaned on my support system. My parents, friends, and even colleagues rallied around me in ways I never expected. They listened when I needed to vent, babysat when I needed a break, and reminded me that I wasn't alone. Their support gave me the strength to keep going, even on the hardest days. Then, something incredible happened. I found joy again. It started small, laughing at a silly cartoon with my son, enjoying a beer with a friend, or feeling proud of a project at work. But those small moments added up. They reminded me that life doesn't stop because of heartbreak. It keeps moving forward, and so should I. Now, 2 years later, I can honestly say I'm in a good place. Melissa and I have a civil co-parenting relationship, and my son is happy, healthy, and thriving. I've even started dating again, cautiously but optimistically. It's not easy to open up after everything I've been through, but I've learned that vulnerability is the only way to truly connect with someone. Looking back, I'm grateful for the lessons this experience taught me. It forced me to confront my own insecurities, redefine my priorities, and grow in ways I never imagined. Most importantly, it taught me that pain is temporary. It may leave scars, but those scars are proof of our strength, our resilience, and our ability to heal. So, if you're going through something similar, know this: it's okay to hurt. It's okay to feel broken. But don't let it define you. Take it one day at a time, lean on the people who love you, and trust that brighter days are ahead. Because they are. I'm living proof of that.